And
another in a series of presidential profiles, James Buchanan, 15th President of the United States.
At the beginning of these unhappy troubles, I determined that no act of mine should increase the excitement in either section of the country. If the political conflict were to end in civil war, it was my determined purpose not to commence it or even to furnish an excuse for it by any act of this government. Justice, as well as sound policy, requires us still to seek a peaceful solution of the questions at issue between the North and the South.
James Buchanan assumed leadership of the United States as a wave of angry passion swept over the nation. Slavery was casting its dark shadow over the union of North and South. Buchanan sought to pierce the darkness of the future and to plot a safe course for the nation. He failed in his efforts to achieve a compromise. Civil war was inevitable. Reared in the prosperous country of the Pennsylvania Dutch, Buchanan had an early taste of battle in the War of 1812. Elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives at the age of 23, he denounced the burning of Washington by the British forces and sounded a patriotic call for American Army volunteers.
There is no alternative but either to protect ourselves by some efficient measures or surrender up that independence which has been purchased by the blood of our forefathers. No American can hesitate which of these alternatives ought to be adopted. The invading enemy must be expelled from our shores. He must be taught to respect the rights of freedom.
Defeated in a bid for a seat in the United States Congress, Buchanan spent the years between 1815 and 1820 developing his law practice and securing a place in the Pennsylvania political machine. In the summer of 1819, tragedy struck when Buchanan's fiancée broke their engagement and shortly thereafter died. Buchanan's grief was immeasurable, and he carried her memory throughout his life.
I have lost the only earthly object of my affections, without whom life now presents to me a dreary blank. I may sustain the shock of her death, but I feel that happiness has fled from me forever.
Buchanan never married, the only president who remained a bachelor. James Buchanan now dedicated his life to a political career, serving 5 terms as the United States representative. Buchanan was a faithful party man, a Jacksonian Democrat, and under Old Hickory he was sent to Russia as the United States ambassador. Censorship under the czars was little different from the restrictions that exist in the Soviet Union today.
When you write, do not say anything which would be offensive to the government. They're not very delicate about opening letters here.
Returning to the States as a senator, Buchanan was caught up in the nation's great westward expansion as ambitious, restless settlers surged beyond the old frontiers and the railroad was moving across the plains, bringing the East and West closer together. The price of expansion was often high, as Indian tribes were ruthlessly shoved off their lands. Texas declared its independence from Mexico, and Remember the Alamo became a national cry. It was the age of America's manifest destiny.
Providence has given to the American people a great and glorious mission to perform, even that of extending liberty over the whole North American continent. Within less than 50 years, there will exist 100 millions of free Americans between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Prevent the American people from crossing the Rocky Mountains, you might as well command Niagara not to flow. We must fulfill our destiny.
But one agonizing wound continued to fester on this spirit of unfettered expansion: the issue of slavery and the increasing bitterness between the North and South. While America grew in power and prosperity, the slavery issue continued to drive a deeper and deeper wedge between the states of the North and South. Abolitionists of the North demanded an end to the evils of bondage. Southerners demanded a continuance of the slavery system. And men like Clay, Webster, and Buchanan sought compromise.
Mr. President, what's your position on the so-called slave-holding states?
Those of us in the northern states who have determined to sustain the rights of the slave-holding states are placed in a most embarrassing position. We are almost literally between two fires.
Buchanan failed to realize that the compromise efforts of the preceding years had not and could not heal the widening rift in the Union. He believed that the government had no constitutional power to interfere in the rights of states regarding slavery. To do so, he felt, would destroy the Union.
Touch this question of slavery seriously, and the Union is from that moment dissolved. Although in Pennsylvania we are all opposed to slavery in the abstract, yet we will never violate the constitutional compact we have made with our sister states. Their rights will be held sacred by us. Under the Constitution, it is their own question, and there let it remain.
Buchanan was an unsuccessful candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1844, and he shortly thereafter accepted a cabinet post as President Polk's Secretary of State. It was during this time that the United States narrowly avoided another war with Great Britain over the Oregon boundary line, 54-40 or fight. War did come, however, with Mexico. Despite the challenges of his job, Buchanan did not enjoy being Secretary of State.
To be Secretary of State is not what it is cracked up to be. I am engaged from morning till night at a season of the year when I had ever been as free as mountain breezes. I never much fancied a cabinet appointment, and now less than ever.
Serving as America's ambassador to Great Britain under President Franklin Pierce, Buchanan was out of the country when the controversial Kansas-Nebraska Act was enacted in 1854. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 had limited the boundaries of slavery. The Kansas-Nebraska Act nullified this compromise, permitting each state to determine whether it would be slave or free. War threatened, and Buchanan was selected as a Democratic candidate who would not rock the boat. He was elected president in 1856, and he immediately sought to resolve the Kansas controversy.
Whether Kansas shall be a free or slave state must eventually be decided by an election. Congress is neither to legislate slavery into any territory or state, nor to exclude it therefrom, but to leave the people thereof perfectly free to form and regulate their domestic institutions in their own way.
2 days after Buchanan's inauguration, the national crisis was inflamed when the Supreme Court handed down the infamous Dred Scott decision. Insurrection broke out in Kansas. The course of history was moving too fast for compromise. Strong action was needed. But Buchanan refused to exercise his presidential powers, seeking to appease the South by offering one concession after another. It was too late for appeasement, and Buchanan was relieved to turn over the reins of government to Abraham Lincoln.
I am now in the 69th year, and am heartily tired of my position as president. I shall leave it in the beginning of March 1861 with much greater satisfaction than when entering on the duties of the office.
News of Lincoln's election resulted in the immediate secession of several southern states and the formation of the Confederacy at a time when Buchanan was filling out the last days of his term in office. Buchanan briefly took a firm stand against the rebellious states, then reverted to his policy of inactivity. He realized now that war must come, but he left it to his successor to resolve the frightful issue and save the Union.
The Union is a sacred trust left by our revolutionary fathers to their descendants. And never did any other people inherit so rich a legacy. The present administration had no alternative but accept the war. The North will sustain the administration almost to a man, and it ought to be sustained at all hazards.